I would go and play with the ants because I didn't have any friends. I don't think anybody should have to go through that. I think there's a lot of people out there that would relate.
Jordan, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
There are many things that I want to talk with you about today. But first, let's go over a little bit about you. You were IT guy turned software engineer turned both.
Turned both, yep.
So tell us a little bit about that, what that is, what you do.
Yeah, so my career, my profession is a DevOps engineer. What we specialize in is kind of making the software work for the engineers, right? So when an engineer, like a software engineer, they make some sort of code, they make a change, it needs to get from their computer, their laptop, or their desktop, whatever it might be, out to a production system. For example, I want to update a button on a web page. Well, a developer might change the button and everything like that, but how does it get out onto the mysterious cloud and never fail or fail very infrequently? How do you make sure that it's tested, that it works right, and that it's accessible around the world? That's my job, is to make sure that comes to fruition.
So you do software engineering for software engineers?
Yes.
Like inception?
Kind of, yeah.
So you've been a computer guy for basically your whole life.
It was interesting to see how my parents reacted when I started, hacking into the, admin account, because they had Norton 360 installed and I couldn't go on to a bunch of the websites that dealt with hacking, and it was blocking it. So I was bypassing the internet filters and stuff like that. And
so you've been into hacking, into learning about computers, into all of that for a while now. And I know you've told me a few times that being good at all of that, being able to understand computers and that kind of having that kind of intellectual prowess in that way has come at a cost for you.
Yes. So I have Savant Syndrome, right?
So what is that?
So Savant Syndrome is a syndrome where there's certain things that an individual can be highly, highly exceptional at, right? So for example, if you've ever heard of somebody that can hear a song once and then be able to recreate it on the piano, right? That's Savant Syndrome. Or somebody that can look at the New York City skyline for the first time for, a minute and be able to recreate it in a mural, almost photographic memory.
Right. So what does yours look like?
So what mine looks like is when I learn something, I visualize it very easily, right? My brain starts to take things and put them into blocks that I can move around in my brain. I can tell, I don't really know how to describe it, but I can tell that my visual cortex somehow is involved with being able to process certain types of information.
Well, you did some work. You had an MRI done on your brain, and you plugged it into some kind of program and were able to see exactly what parts of your brain were high functioning and what weren't. Can you tell us about that, what you did?
Yeah. So this was one of those hyperfixations. I had gotten an MRI scan done, I think it was like a year and a half ago at this point. So I went ahead and asked them for the DICOM images, that's what they're called, and plugged it into a software called FreeSurfer. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it takes your brain and does what's called volumetry, right? And it takes the volume and shape of each region in your brain and compares it against a large database of healthy brains. And in that, I was able to find quite a bit of deviances from the norm, right? And when I say the norm, it's between 95 and 98%, depending on the region that we're talking about, of all MRI scans that they get.
So what did you find?
So what I found was, I have to look at it explicitly to double check, but my temporal lobes, so they deal with a lot of sensory information, input and everything like that. They were enlarged, between 50 and 100% enlarged. It was abnormally large compared to the rest of my brain. The overall volume of my brain is normal, right? But the areas that were enlarged and shrunken are where these details kind of tease out some of these things that I was able to find out about myself. That was really interesting.
So like, what made sense to you when you looked at it?
So most people that talk to me, within a few minutes, they will understand that I have a ridiculous memory. When I learn something, it will stick for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. It's not photographic, but it is very good. And it is selective. Sometimes it's a pain because I remember things from, when I was a young child, or I remember learning about things, and I don't know, sometimes it's overbearing for those around me, because when I will explain it and when I'll talk about it, all of it starts bubbling to the surface, and I just keep talking and talking and talking and talking. And my family has dubbed it the gift of gab, right? And I just talk and talk and talk and talk, which actually brings us to another point. Almost every language center or region associated with language in my brain was enlarged, right? I attribute some of that to coding, because when you code, studies have shown that when you are coding, you're actually using the language centers as well as the logic centers, but you don't necessarily only think in logic. You're actually thinking using the parts of your brain that are dealing with language.
Right. So was there anything that you found that, because these are areas that were enlarged, which means that there have to be areas that were smaller.
Yes.
So what areas did you find that were smaller, and how did you feel about that?
Yeah. So there was one region in particular that stood out to me, because I've struggled in the past with being able to read and understand people's body language. And I know that this is something that I'm lacking, right? So I have a hard time picking up on social cues, things around that. Slightly autistic and self-diagnosed again, but it had to do with the volumes of a region. Again, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to pull up my notes, but it deals with mirror neurons. And this region of mirror neurons, what they do is, when you are in social situations, scientists have found that these mirror neurons will actually fire very similar across multiple people in the same group, in the same interactions. And the purpose of this is to be able to kind of understand other people a little better in social situations. And for me, that region was very small. Interestingly though, other regions dealing with emotional processing were normal sized, right? So the feeling of emotion is not missing, but the ability to interpret social cues and to maybe give off social cues seems like that was impacted. When I was a child, my parents fought very hard to keep me out of the special needs program. When I remember looking at some documents, and I didn't realize this growing up, right? Because I was so oblivious. But when I was looking at some of the documents and stuff that they had from my elementary school and middle school and high school, there were teachers and counselors that would come in the back of the room and observe me and watch. And they would come in and they would sit at the back of the class, and the teacher would say, "Don't mind them." And I didn't mind them because I didn't think anything of it. And they would watch me, and they would see how I interacted with my friends. And then they would do literacy tests. And the literacy tests, they wanted to make sure that I was able to, speak and talk. I was speech delayed. I didn't start talking until I was 3. I remember seeing an IQ test that I had got in elementary school, and I think it was 75, right? And 77 was the cutoff for special needs. And my mom was like, "What the heck? He's a genius at home."
What do you think the issue was? Why did you get a 70? Because you are a genius. What was going on?
Well, what was going on is I didn't care about the test. I just wanted to be done with the test, and I was just filling in circles.
Oh, you weren't even trying.
I wasn't even trying. Exactly. And that's the case for a lot of people that have ADHD. Right?
Okay, yeah.
I wasn't even trying. I was filling in circles. I didn't care. Right?
Did you understand what the test was for?
No.
You just like, okay, here's a piece of paper. I want to get done over with this, and
Yeah, I didn't care.
did they explain it to you though? And you just
Well, they said you need to do it, and I didn't care because I didn't care about authority.
Yeah, okay. Well, usually ADHD can be afraid of authority.
I was afraid of authority, but I also was defiant against authority. Right? And
You have a mix.
because I think there's a little bit of that autism mixed in there, there was also a level of I don't understand authority.
Which made them scarier.
Yeah. So there was this combination that was happening that my mom was like, "No, keep him in." And she was fighting to keep me out of special needs programs. Right? And this was elementary school. And they started trying to put me on different medications. I remember starting Ritalin for the first time, and I had blackouts, right? Horrible, horrible side effects. I don't remember. I would get so angry that I would start running around, destroying things, just hurting my family,
Right.
throwing tantrums, and I don't remember the tantrums. So Ritalin is a medication that it's a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. I guess the best way to describe it is to start off with a little bit on how the neurotransmitters fire and everything like that. So when a neurotransmitter, or when your neurons fire, what they're doing is they're releasing neurotransmitters, right? And these neurotransmitters are signalers that allow cells to talk to each other. So when these chemicals are released, it will have a certain amount of time that it can signal, and then your body starts pulling it back out of the synapse, because you don't want to just have it constantly firing, turned on, because then you lose all information, right? With a lot of people that have ADHD, it's been discovered that in some cases they have too many of what I call the vacuum cleaners. They kind of pull out these dopamine chemicals,
Okay.
right? These neurotransmitters. And what Ritalin does, and a lot of the medications do for ADHD, is they block these little vacuum cleaners, so to speak, that pull the dopamine back out of the synapse.
Okay.
Right? So you end up with more there, takes longer to clear. Right?
So it floods the synapse.
Yes, so it floods the synapse and allows it to signal for longer. The reason that helps is because a lot of people that have ADHD, they have not enough signaling in the dopamine receptors. I mean, it's kind of debated right now whether or not it actually has to do with dopamine. I think in some cases it can be, but that's another rabbit hole that we can go down.
Right.
You know, but essentially, when you increase the dopamine levels in certain regions of the brain, it can help with attention and focus because you're anticipating a larger reward.
Right.
Right. And I don't know why I blacked out, but I was blacking out, taking this Ritalin. They started switching me between different stimulant medications, and they all deal with increasing dopamine levels in the brain. And during this time, I could tell that I was already delayed because I would hang out and play with my friends that were, you know, a grade or two younger than me, right? And I really didn't have any solid friends. In fact, it was actually at the point where I would go and play with the ants on the playground. I would bring the ants food because I didn't have any friends, right? And I would watch the ants.
Was this more towards the 8-9 range or late? Like, when was this?
This was
the whole time.
The whole time. Yeah, I was assigned a friend, and I don't know. I just didn't get along with the assigned friend.
Did you know?
I knew
that they were assigned friend?
Yes, I knew it was an assigned friend.
So what did you do about that since you knew?
I didn't care.
You didn't care that they were assigned?
Yeah, it was a matter of I don't care. Right? It's just the same reason I was failing my classes. I just didn't care. Right? I didn't have that understanding.
I guess, how do you feel about it now?
Now, what do you mean?
Because how you felt about it, you had limited understanding then, and you had a different way of viewing the world then than you do now. So how does the 29-year-old Jordan see the 10-year-old Jordan? Or feel towards?
How do I feel towards it?
Towards him.
Sorrow.
In what way?
I don't think anybody should have to go through that.
What would you say you're feeling right now?
Like a child.
Like you're feeling as if you were that 10-year-old boy?
Yeah.
What's he feeling?
Confused. Misunderstood. Lonely.
What does he want people to understand about him?
That's a tough question. I think what he wants people to understand is, I don't even know if it's as much wanting, I don't know, maybe this is just me because I don't know anything different, but what that boy really wanted and needed was a genuine friend that understood some things I didn't get. I didn't understand. Right? Somebody that, even if it was an adult, I didn't care. Somebody that would understand that I don't understand basic stuff, very basic stuff. How to read a person, how to tell when they are not comfortable. Even children pick up on this. When you're a child, you don't pick up on social cues. Children, they're very perceptive, right? If somebody had come and taken me, and instead of teaching me how to function in the classroom, if they had taught me how to read and function socially, right? And how to actually develop and maintain relationships and friendships, right? If they had taken me aside and taught me how to see a face and recognize that, oh, that person is happy or excited, or that person is angry or sad, or that person is confused, and just shown me pictures and told me, very basic, and helped me understand those things, because people just take that for granted, that you can recognize that. That would have helped way more than the counseling that I received, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of people out there that would relate.
So what would 29-year-old Jordan say to 10-year-old Jordan?
It's going to be okay.
It's a pretty simple words. And you say it with emotion. What do you think is behind the tears?
Again, I think it's the pain of not being understood and not being able to understand.
Of being a misfit?
Yeah.
If the pain could talk, what would it say?
Probably something like, I love you. Or, that's the desire that pain had. And somebody to say that. Or at least to feel those actions. I know that my parents did. But at the same time, I mean, how do you understand a child that doesn't care, doesn't express himself, right? My dad didn't understand at all ADHD. He never has.
Most people don't.
Yeah, he tried. But I didn't feel like, I mean, the lack of understanding kind of gives you a sense of loneliness, right? The lack of being understood.
So, 10-year-old Jordan to 29-year-old Jordan, that's, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
What changed, if anything? And how did it change?
Well, I grew up.
Well, I mean,
You know?
Because you're saying 10-year-old Jordan couldn't mirror, can understand. Seems obvious to me that you've gained at least some of those skills.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so, when I finally got kind of stabilized, this was around 7th grade. 7th grade, we found a medication that got me decent grades in school.
You started caring.
Kind of. I started getting decent grades in school, which was a big indicator of overall function. It's not a perfect indicator because it's just academic, but medication called Vyvanse, it was new at the time. It worked, and my grades started getting better. I started being stable enough that I started making friends with other misfits, right? Had just a few friends, and started to just, I started to realize that I was missing something. And it took me until high school, freshman year, high school, before I realized that, hey, I was lacking quite a bit. And I started to realize that I was quite different, right? And up until that point, I hadn't developed that sense of, I guess you could call it, I recognized myself as a person and those directly around me as people. But in a way, everyone else was like an NPC, non-player character. They didn't fully exist in my mind. Right?
That's interesting.
I would go into, Walmart to get food or like I would go to the dollar store, grab some treats or something, and pay with cash, and the cashier, they didn't fully exist as a person in my mind. In high school, that started to form, right? So I was delayed there, where I realizing that that every person has an entire life, right?
So you're just saying this is all about just developmentally being delayed.
Yes. So up until that point,
it started forming. Did you do anything to try and speed up the progress?
Yes. So at this point, I had a crush. I was like, oh, she's pretty cute, all those hormones raging.
Oh, so it was hormones that got you to speed up the process.
Well, it was the thing that spurred it, right? I was already kind of starting to realize how off I was, but those hormones, they're powerful. They will get you to do things. And I started to research and started looking into how to pick up girls, right? It's a pretty common thing that you look up when you're a teenager, right? How do you interact with a girl, right? And then I started to realize that, like, they would say, oh yeah, you can pick up on these little nuances, these facial expressions. And I started looking into it, and I was like, oh, okay, well, when somebody looks over, or when they have like different voice inflections, and all of a sudden I started realizing, hey, I don't have any of this, right? I'm missing this in my whole life, right? I don't have this. And the little bit that I do have, I would shut out because I didn't know how to respond to it, right? And that's when I started to realize, hey, I'm missing all of this stuff. So I started using the internet and learning about, different faces. I started doing exactly the thing that I wish somebody had done to help me when I was a child, by looking at images.
You
And
taught yourself how to mirror.
I taught myself how to mirror. I taught myself how to give off good body language, better body language, I should say. I taught myself how to do voice inflection, right? How to keep people interested in the conversation. I was very monotone, right? And I realized that these were all things that I was missing. And then I also realized that I would only talk about the things I wanted to, or I wouldn't talk at all. And I was like, no, that's not how people interact. That's not what life is about. Now I still struggle with that. I can talk for hours about the things that I love. And I know that it can be draining on other people around me. So I still work on that.
But you become self-aware and willing to work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't understand this, and I realized, hey, I should have learned all this stuff. And nobody ever taught me any of this. They taught me organization skills. They taught me all kinds of stuff, but they didn't teach me the social skills, which arguably are more important these days than a lot of the intellectual skills.
Well, it sounds like what happens a lot in therapy is they treat the symptoms, but they don't get down to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if I had been taught at a younger age just basic facial expressions and basic, how to tell if somebody's excited or, basic emotion, that would have told me so much about the world.
That would have been a game changer for you.
It would have. If I had been able to, even if I was a little bit late on learning those things, I think it would have made a huge difference. But I was very late on learning those things. And because of that, to this day, I'm still struggling with and working on developing those skills and abilities.
Yeah. And you've obviously made a ton of progress.
Yeah, most people wouldn't know that was stuff I struggled with.
Yeah.
Yeah, they meet me and they say, no, that doesn't seem like you. That doesn't sound like Jordan.
Right, which shows how much progress you made. I'm wondering what's helped the most.
What's helped the most is probably time and interacting with people.
Practice.
Yeah, practice. But I couldn't practice if I didn't understand. Like it's.
Well, the self-awareness came
Yeah.
first.
Well, yeah, you can become self-aware, but think about it like this. If you're trying to learn something and nobody ever corrects you when you're wrong, because that would be rude, right? How do you learn? Right.
True. So what you're trying to say is practice with natural correction?
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is I learned the basics enough that I could build off of them, right? So if you can't tell if somebody is really annoyed with you, then you won't understand why people start getting snappy, right? Because normally you'd pick that up,
Right, the connection,
very quickly.
Snappy equals I'm annoying, I'm doing something wrong, or...
And then you're able to most people are able to understand, oh, well, their face is making all these things. They're showing that they want to leave the conversation. They're showing these signs of discomfort.
Their body
for 10
is
minutes
facing
beforehand.
the other way. They're backing up. They're not
Exactly.
making as much eye contact. They're, yeah.
Yeah. So all of these basics, right? I didn't know that, and then people would start getting really frustrated and angry because I couldn't pick up on them. Right?
Because they expected,
It's expected. Yeah. And it's like, oh, you're just ignoring me, and I'm just getting more and more frustrated or more annoyed, and I didn't understand. And I would be like, why are you getting angry at me?
You get more and more confused, and it gets scary and scarier to interact with people.
So then you
Because you
stop.
don't understand
Yeah, because you don't understand what's going on.
So you fix that or you started to work on that by going on the internet, teaching yourself what annoyance looks like,
Yes.
what body language is and what it means. And so you taught yourself a language. Probably why those language centers in your brain also
I never thought about that.
so big.
I never thought about that. I
Because you
wonder if
literally
that
had
is.
to teach yourself a language.
I wonder if that is processed in the language centers. That'd be that'd be a really interesting study to like go into and to.
I have not personally studied that, but that is something I do want to study now.
Get an fMRI, get that checked out. That'd be so interesting. I would love to see that information.
I know what we're looking at next.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was by learning that, and then after knowing that, so you first became self-aware, then you taught yourself those basics. Then by already having those two things solid, you can go out into the world, start practicing it, and then you can understand the cues that they're giving to then process that feedback to know, oh, this works, this doesn't.
Yeah, and this is how I respond.
Yes.
Right.
Well, this is how I respond because this works. I'm getting positive feedback.
Yes. Yeah.
And that obviously took years. And you're saying to this day, though, it's still a struggle for you.
Yeah. So there are certain things that I think are a little bit developmentally, like, for example, when your brain is developing, scientists believe, I could be wrong here, but last time I checked, scientists believe that there are certain windows for learning language. And if somebody, say in some of these severe abuse cases, if a child doesn't learn language by a certain time, that window closes, right? And they're able to learn basic language, but they never fully develop a good understanding of language. Right, and I think that it's possible that I might have missed one of these developmental windows when it comes to understanding some of the more complex nuances in social interaction.
So how does that affect your day-to-day?
So day-to-day, it's not as noticeable because I've learned a lot of things to work around it, but in the end, I still do struggle with understanding some people. Some people are a lot harder to read than others. And I think some of the time it comes off as, okay, well, I don't know how to play, so to speak, right? Because when I was a kid, I didn't play, right? I didn't do that with my friends. I didn't, say for example, play any video games. So I don't know how to play with my friends now. I don't know how to hop on a game and just have a good time with my friends, right? Because I never learned that basic thing because I just didn't have any friends, right? And it was right during that time when you learn how to do that, how to have those kinds of interactions.
How to banter.
How to banter, right? As a teenager, you start to learn how to flirt. I've really struggled with flirting, right? And I think some of that was just because they would come back and they would say something and I would take it literally and I'd be like, oh, what I do, I like this girl. I don't want to mess up, and I never realized that they were trying to play, that they were having banter, right? I didn't realize that until I was in my 20s.
Sarcasm probably really was tough for you.
Yes, it was. I think this is a pretty common thing for autism is understanding some of those like metaphors and sarcasm. That's something that a lot of them struggle with. And I struggled with that myself. And I get it now a lot of the time, unless it kind of comes out of the blue and I miss it. I'm like, oh, sometimes I still miss it. But, I never understood a lot of the sayings that people have until I really sat down and thought about it and realized, oh, okay.
So all that considered, how do you play now? How do you banter? How do you interact socially? How do you have a normal social life, or would you call it that?
I would say to this day, I still get along best with those that were misfits growing up. Right?
Relatable.
Yeah.
People want someone to relate with.
Yeah. And a lot of the time it comes in the form of having conversations, kind of like what we're having. We just talk about random stuff, right? We just chill. And a lot of the time we talk about a lot of the stuff that either of us have learned, right? That's something that I have carried with me that I think is a good trait, but it can kind of come off as overwhelming still for some people because I love learning, right? I love discovering new things. In specific areas, my hyperfocus, it's a fairly broad hyperfocus compared to most people that have some sort of hyperfixation. It's most things medical and most things tech, right? And these hyperfixations, they're very broad. So we'll talk about these hyperfixations or things that I can relate with them on that maybe don't have something to do with sports, for example. I'm not super into sports, right? So I struggle to interact with people that are really into sports, right? And I think that's normal to a degree, but at the same time, it stays a little bit more focused on those hyperfixations.
Is it hard to find people that can relate with you on the same level that you're at with tech and the medical field?
Yeah.
You smile like, that was an instant, like, oh yeah.
It's hard. The hard part is, because when I learn something, it sticks. I have very, very good depth in a lot of areas, but I don't have all of the breadth, right? So I have a lot of areas, say for example, with the brain and the MRI and stuff like that. It's like, okay, I could talk with a doctor about it, but I don't know many doctors, right? I could talk with a doctor, and a lot of the doctors, they've never done volumetry, right? And if they have, it was for like a semester in their residency program.
Yeah.
Right. And here I spent, several weeks, which several weeks is, I know that doesn't sound like a long time, but I spent several weeks
but weeks
hyperfixating on it.
Hyperfixation means you're basically studying it.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very strong, and my memories are very, very well formed during hyperfixation, right? So I spent a few weeks learning this, and when I did go talk to somebody that was going into, I think it was neuroscience or something like that, and she was, she has like 2 years left in her PhD program, and she's like, oh yeah, I just had a semester on Free Surfer, the software that I had used to perform volumetry. And we were able to talk, and it was really nice.
You could actually have a conversation.
We were able to have a conversation. And it was really nice. It was refreshing because there are not many people that can talk about a lot of the things that I find interest in, because say, for example, when I'm learning about stuff like peptides, right? There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff with peptides, very powerful for healing. And I start researching it and looking down this rabbit hole, so to speak, of peptides. And I get down to, oh, okay, well, this is how it's chemically structured, and this is how synthesis happens, right? And, you go on Joe Rogan, and they're just like, oh, yeah, here's ipamorelin. It shows promise for this.
They don't go into the.
They don't go into those details.
Yeah.
And for me, I go into those details, right? And I try to make connections.
Okay. So we're running out of time, so we got to wrap up here. I just want to end by asking you if there's anything you want the audience to know, because I don't always ask the best questions. There might have been times today that you're like, oh, I wish you would have asked me this, or I wanted to be able to say this, or whatever, that you want the audience to know to help them, because like you said before, I'm sure there are several audience members that are relating with you right now, like, wow, that was me, or that is me. What would you want them to know?
Yeah. So if I had to say anything, if you are struggling with feeling like you can understand, like you don't understand what's going on, or you don't understand people, if you come to that realization, there is hope if you learn those basics. Right? I've met many people that are in their early to mid 20s, mostly men, that are struggling to feel like they understand women, they understand how to keep friends, how to have friends, how to interact socially. And they've, interestingly, looked up to me. And I think part of the reason that they look up to me is because I've figured a lot of it out.
You're the symbol of hope.
Yeah. And if you listen to the path that I took in this podcast, then you'll probably be able to make some progress furthering your job or your relationships. If you're anything like me, you've struggled with ADHD, maybe you were a misfit growing up, something like that. Oftentimes it comes down to not understanding social interaction, social cues. So start by going online, looking up those resources, they're out there, to learn how to recognize. Make sure that you have a good emotional intelligence, or do what you can to improve it. Look at those sites. There are a lot of sites out there that you can look at images of people with expressions on their faces. And you have choices to say, hey, I think it's this. You can see and you can develop and you can realize, hey, you know what? I thought I was good at this. A lot of people think they're really good at it. And then they go to these sites and they start to try to do this and they're like, yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm doing. Try it out, see what you score. And if your score isn't what you had hoped, then work on it.
Yeah. Well, and I think coming from a therapeutic perspective, a lot of what I've done as a therapist starts from being able to help them connect more with themselves, with people, with whatever higher power they choose to have in their life, right? And this is a big part of connection, right? So if you can do something to help yourself connect better with people,
yes,
that is a key starting point to healing.
Yeah.
And that is the key to healing from my perspective, is being able to connect.
Yeah.
So
100%. I am super grateful that you had me on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
It's been a good time. And
not a long time, but a good time.
yeah, it's been a good time though. So
well, thank you, and we'll have you back on later. For sure. We have a lot more to talk about.